everybody, grab your Bible, a pencil, and a journal, and maybe even a cup of coffee, and join in on the conversation. But first, I would like for you to write this down. Exodus 5, verses 1 through 3. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." Then they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword."
Hey everyone, welcome to Write This Down with Dot Bowen. My name is Cara. I am Dot's daughter, and every week we sit down together and we talk through truth and scripture. And first I want to say happy 4th of July if you're in America. And I also want to say this episode will end a little differently than normal. So we ended up having a lot that we wanted to say with freedom. So we will have a continuation of our conversation next week. So if you're wondering when this episode ends, we will have more to say, and we do say more next week. So please make sure you come back for next week when we continue the conversation on freedom. But for now, we would love for you to pull up a chair and join in this first part of our freedom conversation.
Hey, Cara. Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July to you.
Yeah, it's almost a 4th of July,
Tomorrow.
and here we are. Yeah, and we are celebrating probably one of the greatest blessings that God has given us as Americans to celebrate our freedom. Yeah. And so I have thought so often about how often we take for granted, I think, that America, that we're free at the moment. And, if you go to other places and go to different countries, even as difficult and, situations going on in this world that's very, kind of sad, a lot of things that are going on, it's still one of the greatest countries in the world. And we should be very thankful.
I think you don't know what you don't know. And I think if you haven't visited other countries and seen, other countries are amazing. It's not like a diss to other countries, but when we have other countries that listen to us, which super grateful.
That's wonderful.
But I think, the freedom, it's something that I don't think you really realize you want it or like it or how good it is until it's taken away. Just like anything that you can't fully appreciate something until it's gone. I think that's just a principal truth, but
sad situation, but true. I think that's sad, but it is true.
So I think being able to freedom to worship who you want to worship, religion, freedom of speech, freedom to do really whatever you want to do in terms of, your dreams, like whatever, that's the American dream, to be able to,
that's right.
And I feel like that is one of the beautiful things, I think, with people who do come to America to kind of start over or restart or, whatever, that
have a life.
Yeah. To be able to
have a change of life.
But I know that also, as I know we're going to talk about, like how freedom is such a biblical truth concept. I don't know what the word is, but it's biblical.
Yeah, it really is. And, I was thinking about when you were saying, come, to the country, and that we have freedom of speech and we have freedoms in this country, but yet we have laws. And so we're not just free to do whatever we want to do. We can't just decide, well, I'm going to run this red light, or I'm going to go and,
well, you are free to do that.
Rob a bank or whatever.
There will just be consequences.
You are free, but you're being jail. Yeah.
So I think that's part of the freedom where you can, you for sure can do those things that are against the law, but you will also be free to sit in jail.
Be in jail. Sit there and talk about your freedom as you're in jail. And that is a great entry into what we want to talk about with freedom, because freedom is so misunderstood. A lot of people believe that I'm just free to do what I want to do, not knowing that our choices, we are free to choose. We're free to, like you said, if you want to go do the things and disobey the law, but you have the consequences. And that is true. Once we begin to make those decisions and exercise our freedom to choose and the power to choose, then we begin to reap those consequences. And all of a sudden, that freedom to choose now has flipped. And now that power to choose has now taken over. And now our choice has the power over us. And I think we get misled in thinking I can kind of just go and live any way that I want to do. There's no consequences. And that I'm free to do that, not knowing that some of our choices and the things that we choose to do puts us back in bondage.
I think this might seem like a contradiction to what we're talking about with freedom, but I don't know that there is true freedom in terms of, I think that there's always something that's governing us as humans, like whether, like you're saying, just like with choices, it's like those sometimes just wanting to have the right that can govern how we do things. Some people have that mentality where it's like, I want to do whatever I want to do, regardless of whatever that is. And that's kind of like, well, so I think freedom is like tricky in that way, because it's like, are we ever, are you ever truly free?
Are we really free?
And again, I think we're talking more in like a biblical sense, but it's like, are you ever truly free? Because like, I'm just thinking of, when I was in seminary, one of my favorite classes was this Old Testament class that I took. And I know you and I have talked about it a number of times. And this was years ago that I took this particular class, because I was in seminary for a lot of years. I'm not a doctor, not a doctor of theology, but my professor really changed the way I looked at the Old Testament, in particular Exodus, because she pointed out, a lot of times we think of the Exodus, and Moses leads the people out.
Let my people go.
They're like, let my people go, let my people be free. But that's never what is said in Exodus. What is said is, let my people go so that they can go worship God. Like God says to Moses, let my, you're going to lead my people so that they worship me. Moses says to Pharaoh, let the people go so that they can go worship God. And I think that was so interesting, because it's like they are being released from bondage of the Egyptians, and they are going to be free. But that's part of the freedom, is being underneath the umbrella of God's protection, or worshiping the Lord. So anyways, I just think, so I was thinking about that, of like, there's, at the Israelites, like they were released, they were freed of that Egyptian bondage, but it wasn't so that they were quote unquote free. It was more so that they could go worship instead of worshiping the other.
And here's the thing. I think Paul talks about, I'm a slave to Jesus, and everybody hates that word because it says, that I'm, a slave, and he talks about my chains, and he said,
it's like, that's not
of course, but he talks about his chains. He talks about being, chained. And I think that what Paul was saying was, I may be in prison based on Rome, but I'm really set free because I'm really chained. I'm really a slave to God. Like I am slave to righteousness versus I'm a slave to sin. No longer he talks about that in Romans, but as what you're talking about
Israelites.
Is there's a difference. Yeah, there's a difference in being free in a country and then being free from within. And I think that that's what Paul was talking about with Rome, and I think that's what Moses, is saying to the Pharaoh. I think that's what God was telling Moses, to leave Egypt so that you can go worship me, because in Egypt they were not free to go worship God, Jehovah. They were surrounded by different gods, and we see as we travel with them that they go back and want to start worshiping those gods. But I think that, when we talk about freedom, we're living in a country that is free, but we also are very much people that are very much enslaved to a lot of things. And so, when you're talking about freedom, if you're talking about what country I'm living in versus am I free emotionally? Am I free, in addictions? Am I free basically sin? Am I free to really go worship? And am I free living a life of holiness, or am I in bondage to a life of sin? And I think that that's where the divided line is. So with Moses talking to Pharaoh, he is talking about, let my people go to worship God, meaning that in the country that they lived in, they were not free to really go into this tabernacle. They weren't free to go. And then in Rome, the same thing in the New Testament. And Jesus comes on the scene, as we'll talk later, about saying, I've set you free. But what was Jesus saying? He wasn't saying necessarily, I'm going to free you from Rome, which is why a lot of people were so mad, because they were waiting on Jesus to be this king. So again, going back to Moses and Egyptians and stuff like that, we so believe often that our freedom is based on our circumstances around us, that our freedom is based on where we live or what we're doing, and it's really being free.
Yeah.
within.
I think that's one of the things that people sometimes get tripped up with Christianity, is because people want to do what they want to do. And I feel like Christianity has all these rules of whatever, like all these rules. But it's interesting.
The Ten Commandments.
Yeah, the Ten Commandments. But then even just with Jesus, not to do certain things or do certain things or, whatnot. And so, but it's interesting, because I'm like, if you were to look at, someone who's truly following Jesus, they don't seem like they're bogged down with all these rules, or, you and I, I don't feel like that, because I think it's like, and I think that's how the enemy can kind of get us tripped up. It's like, well, yeah, you can do whatever you want, but is that beneficial? Because then you're, like you're saying, and what Jesus is saying in the New Testament, it's like, but then you're a slave to that, to whatever, whatever sin or whatever action or whatever, consequences that you may have to, endure from doing whatever you want to do. But it's like, yeah, you for sure. I mean, even as a follower of Jesus, yeah, you can do whatever you want to do. But I think there's such a connection between freedom and love. Like if you, at least that's how I perceive it, or I kind of interpret it in my mind, is there is, even with Moses, like letting the Israelites go to be free in the desert and to the promised land, was to go, it was really go love the Lord. That was the worship. It was to go love the Lord. And then, but the same thing with us. Like, I think there is this love. I don't know how to explain what's in my head, but it's like, I just see when you truly are free internally, there's this love.
Well, I think when you're truly in love with something, I think love does, even though there's certain things you can do when you love someone, you're going to.
Yeah, it's like you're free to do. You're still free to.
Yeah, right.
To technically, quote unquote, do whatever you want to do. But it's like, but would you do that if you really love them? And there's a sense of freedom that you have, where I don't think freedom is doing whatever you want to do. I think freedom is something else. I don't know what I don't know how to define freedom, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't think freedom is doing whatever you want to do. To me, that doesn't feel free. That just feels like, okay, well, cool, you can do whatever you want to do, but am I making sense? Probably not.
There's a verse, there's a verse in 1 Corinthians, and I'm going to look it up, but it says something about, you've done what you want to do. Now what good did you do? Paul was writing to the church in Corinth, and they were living and, doing a lot of things that they thought they were so free to do. And Paul says to them, now that you've done all of those things, what good is it? Now, aren't you really regretting all the things that you've done? I remember when I was a teenager, and I remember getting mad at my dad because he was telling me I couldn't do something. And I remember specifically saying, I can't wait until I'm a grown up and I can do what I want to do. Nobody tell me what to do. Now, what grown up do you know that goes to work and somebody's not going to tell them what to do, when to get there, and when to, what time you're supposed to show up and what you're supposed to do. And, a lot of people, make a joke about, the boys or the girls that say, oh, I'm tired of my parents telling me what to do. I'm going to go join the service. I've talked about that before, as if you have all this freedom in the service. You are, you're owner, pretty much. They own you. And a lot of people think that. They think, oh, if I, go out from underneath this amount of authority, then I'm free. I don't have to deal with authorities. But you do. Everybody does. And even as a believer, like you said, we're under the authority of, living a life of holiness, being able to glorify God. But what you were saying is, because you love God, because I love God, we don't feel that way. And it's the same thing. I mean, I do things for you, not because you make me do things, but as I'm doing things for you as a mom, I do it because I love you. When you were young and, getting up in the middle of the night, having to feed you throughout the night, changing your diapers. It's hard to think about that now that you're such a grown, beautiful woman. But I'm saying, I had to do those things. I was free not to do those things, but because I love you, I did those things. And I don't think of it as a sacrifice. I think it as a privilege to be able to do it. And I think that's thing. I think what we're trying to say, we're going around in a world of doing it, is that freedom really is motivated from a heart of love, that you can, do things. And I do believe that that's one of the issues with the Israelites, in the fact that they thought of God as a to-do list. And even though God told them, I want you to love me with all your heart, soul, and mind, then he starts about, and this is going to be the best way that you're going to be set free in the wilderness. These are the things that's going to help you move through the wilderness. And he gives out the list of the 10 commandments. But it starts out with the first commandment is to love God, with all his heart and soul. So I think there's a sense of freedom that we feel to love people when we're loving them without feeling like we're have to, that we're made to love them. And I think that's the problem right now with the church is, and with people that do not want to come and follow Jesus, is because they feel like there's all these things they have to do. And yes, there are things that, as a believer, there are things that we're to do. But
well,
that's
it's like
true
we
in all
just
of
got
life.
done a couple weeks ago finishing up that series on forgiveness. It's like that is a command. That's one of those things as a believer that he says we, ought to do. But how much more free are you or am I when we walk into that forgiveness? When we do forgive, when we accept our forgiveness from God, as well as extending forgiveness, it's like that is so freeing. And it's like that. Like I feel like that is that principle. It's like there's anything that God has asked of us out of love, and we do out of love. Like there's so much freedom and joy in that. Like there's peace. There's
That's right.
like that's what that's that freedom. And I back when I mean, this has been a few years, but when I was doing a lot of like travel photography, like that was my whole premise. That was my whole like inspiration, really, was this idea that we were made for freedom because we were made for love. Like we were made to be able to choose the Lord and to glorify him and to be his child. We are his children, like like that's what we were made for, and that can't be taken away. And I think that's something that is such a beautiful thing too, is that of course, like our freedom as a country is always at risk just because it just is. That's, we may not always be free. I hope and pray to God that we will be, but regardless, that is something that we can rest in as well, is that what freedom that God gives us internally and spiritually, in our heart and soul, like that can never, no matter what's going on in the outside world, like that can never be taken away.
the key here is really Jesus is the only one that really can set us free from within. And I think that when we're talking about countries or we're talking about situations, those are the things outside of us. Now, those things outside of us can cause us to feel enslaved. You can be free to do drugs, but you're going to get addicted.
Right.
You're
free
free
to be
to
enslaved to that.
look at some of the things. Yeah, you can look at some things that are, not nice. They're, porn or whatever it is. I hate to say it, but it is what it is. I mean, you can look at those things, but you're going to be enslaved. You can look at Instagram. You can look at all of those things.
Well, some people feel like they're a slave to their emotions, even. Like they, it's like whatever. It's just like getting out of balance. And I think we've talked about that a number of times of like, I think you can be a slave to things that I think people can be a slave to their children. That doesn't mean that your children are bad, but if you're so controlled by that, I mean, I guess it's ultimately an idol. But I think that kind of goes back to like, you're gonna serve someone or something. And it goes thinking back to even the Israelites. So what are you gonna serve? And that depends. That is what's going to determine your freedom. And, the Israelites were in bondage to the Egyptians and, the Israelites were in bondage to the Egyptians and they were to be released to, not to be in bondage to the Lord, obviously, but they were still it was like an exchange of ruling. Like they were being ruled by the Egyptians, but then they were to be released to be ruled by God, which is freedom. There's freedom there.
I think too, Cara, as you're talking, I was thinking about this. He's in Exodus 5 that I was reading. It says, Moses went to Pharaoh and said, let my people go, let God's people go, so that they can go out and sacrifice to their God. That's who they were. They were known by that. They should have been known by that. And so I think a lot of times we're not free to be who we are. We're not free to be the person God created us to be. Like you said, we were created to walk with God. We had one rule, and that was it. God wanted us to be free. And that's why he sent Jesus, because, sin had enslaved us. And I think that one of the things that we have to realize is that the freedom, when we're free, we are more like who we were created to be. We're more who we are. But when we're enslaved to other people or things, then we have to lose a little bit of ourselves. We have to lose our identity a little bit of I'm known for certain things. I could easily be addicted to sugar. Well, okay, I am. I just might as well admit it. There's, And, it's one of those things. I know that, there's nothing like a Krispy Kreme donut. And I was by there the other day and Hot Sign was on. And I thought to myself, I'm going to go in. And I thought, no.
I'm so proud of you.
Because it doesn't.
That was such a big,
and
that was a big deal. Wow, I'm so proud. You're fighting.
Hot Sign was on too, by the way.
Yeah, I know, it's hard.
Yeah, and it is hard. And a lot of people might laugh at that, but
no, for you, I'm like legitimately
physical,
saying, I'm sincerely proud of you because I know that is a struggle.
One of my yes, and sugar's hard for me. I like anything with the first ingredients of sugar, but a Krispy Kreme donut is close to my heart. And laugh at that, but that is just an enticement. That's a little bit of a, thought, I just have one, but not thinking, at the moment that I never stop at one. I never stop at two unless I'm with a friend that makes me stop at two. But I just think that, we don't realize that the mentality of these things that are there to enslave us, that is robbing us of being who God created us to be. And that's what happened with the Israelites.
So how can we know, because there are people who, I don't have a sugar tooth. I'm more of a salty person. And I know we're just going to use that example, but I think, there are people who do love Krispy Kreme donuts, but it may not be to the, may not be with what you're talking about. So how can we know basically when there's something in our life that it's crossed the line of, okay, like I'm actually enslaved to this, or I am, you know what I mean? Like where it's crossed the line, because I think, we can love things, we can enjoy things, and we're not like a slave to it. We're not, that's not where it's at. But like how can we know that? How can we know if there's...
Try to stop it. That's the best way I know to know that you're enslaved. Try to say to yourself, I'm not going to do that. And look at the struggle that you have within it. Just try to say, okay, I'm free not to do, I remember this is a big thing. I was thinking, again, it was about eating. And I was thinking, I'm free to eat this stuff. This is not, I looked at Genesis to Revelation, and it does talk a little bit about eating too much honey, but there's not a Krispy Kreme in there. I've looked it up, and there's not a verse on it. But I remember literally praying and saying, God, I know I'm free to eat this. And I felt like literally God said to me at that moment, did you ever think that you're free not to do it?
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. I was like, you're free to not as well.
Moment.
Yeah.
Free not to. Yes. And I think that those are the things. You try to stop doing certain things. You say, I'm not going to be on my phone when I'm with people, or I'm not going to, I'm not going to keep turning on the TV. I'm not going to do these things.
I was thinking,
try to do it and see how hard it is.
For myself, like when I think I'm going to try to not think about something, I'm going to try to not like obsessively try to figure something out. Like how we talked about last week a little bit with like distractions. Like I'm going to, to stop trying to, almost like a slave to knowledge in a way, like to, I'm more of a thinker, like I've said. So it's like I can think myself, to death in a way, So I was thinking of that when you're talking of like, sometimes it's that of like, stop, not like, sometimes we can be thinking about things, but I don't know. It's like, you just know, for me, it's like, I just know there are certain things or certain situations where it's like,
well, you're controlled by it.
Yes.
That's the difference. You're controlled.
Yeah. And it's affecting, and then, it's like, I can't stop thinking about it.
And you cannot stop.
It's affecting my, my emotions. It's affecting
everything.
My day to day or my,
And, and I think that this is something that, for us as, we're talking about freedom, like, why would God, care? Like, does God really care if I go when the hot sign's on to do, to have too many donuts? Well, if you're pre-diabetic and you go by the hot sign and you go in and eat a bunch of donuts and then you're sick.
It's kind of like a drug.
And you really need to go do a recording on the podcast, or you really need to go do some filming, or you need to go teach, but you don't feel good, then the very thing that I thought was free was keeping me from doing what I wanted to do. I think that we've talked about, me decluttering, this move that just about, 40 years in the wilderness. And I tell you, I looked at all this stuff and I thought, God, this stuff's controlled me. Like, I'm free to go buy it. I had the money to go buy it. But, I was free not to buy it. And it's one of those things is what is controlling you? And if it is controlling you, it's going to change the quality of your life. It may not change. It may, change how long you live. But I really believe that God, gives you, your last breath. He takes it from you. But I do believe that your quality of life. So we are free inside. We are free. Like you said, God has given us the freedom to choose, but don't underestimate the power of choice. I've said it over and over again.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a huge principle.
It goes back to your Genesis 3 that you love to talk about. Like Adam and Eve had all the freedom in the world in the Garden of Eden. They were free to eat of the apple, but they were free not to. And I think that it's like there are consequences to both. If they, not sometimes consequences, maybe it's not a bad thing, but it's like if they had chosen not to eat of it, there are, I guess, results, maybe a better word because consequences are a little bit more negative. But And yeah, I think that's
I think if they had not eaten it, they would not know what the results of it was. But I don't think they really wanted the results of it. I think not choosing to obey God is always best, but you sometimes never know what the consequences. You were saying earlier, like you don't know what you have until you lose it, and sometimes losing it and choosing the wrong thing makes you aware of, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to live like this. And I think I think it would make a difference if they had not chosen it. They would have lost something, but it was losing the understanding of what it means to disobey
I also
God.
want to clarify that, because you're not saying that it was a good thing that they took of the fruit.
No.
You're just saying...
What I'm saying is they did lose something. If they had not eaten of the fruit, they would have lost the ability to know what it means to disobey God. But that is not good.
Thanks for listening. I'm so glad that you could be a part of our conversation. To continue the conversation, you can find Dot on social media at @Bowen or visit her website, dotbowen.com. Subscribe, like, and share with your friends, and we will see you next week on Write This Down with Dot Bowen.